Setting the stage is a critical component of any good performance. Plays, films, stories, and countless other media set the stage in both literal and metaphorical ways in hopes of delivering a memorable journey. The events centered around Punishing Gray Raven's 16th chapter, titled Evernight Beat, are a deep look into what it means to not only set the stage, but what one must do to stand upon it and deliver a memorable performance, even when the script is ever-changing. Before we dive into this ever-important chapter, I would once again like to highly suggest that you be caught up to this point in the story before watching this lore dive. This video will be discussing events from Chapter 16, its hidden chapter, and the Interlude, A Great Show. References to earlier chapters and interludes may also be included, so for the best experience, I highly recommend you are fully caught up to these points in the story before continuing. I also want to relay an important content disclaimer for this video in particular, as there will be discussion and descriptions of scenes that involve a character enacting self-harm, so please use caution if this is a subject you're sensitive to. I'll have a note in the description for timestamps where these discussions occur. The last spark was a finely honed and laser-focused chapter in Punishing Gray Raven. Despite being a very lengthy read, it stayed on course with a very specific set of goals and stories in mind. The growth of Vera and Lamia, the history of Atlantis, and the Omega File are the stars of that chapter essentially from start to finish. Evernight Beat is a very different set of events, with broad sweeping implications to not only dozens of the main characters, but for the very world of Punishing Gray Raven itself. Chapter 16 takes place shortly after the mission to Atlantis and the successful retrieval of the Omega File. We begin back in Babylonia, where a scheduled meeting of the World Government Conference, or the WGC, has been called to order. After the heart-racing adventure of trying to uncover the secrets of Atlantis and zero-point technology, we're placed in a much more day-to-day setting that nonetheless is just as important in humanity's fight to reclaim Earth. We get a glimpse of the process behind the proceedings of a WGC meeting. Topics of discussion up for vote are displayed via Gestalt's interface and are gone through systematically with discussion and a final vote on if the measures discussed should pass. It's here that we're introduced to a new character, Hilda, a long-established congresswoman and the head of the control court for the WGC. Hassan acts as the lead for the proceedings, and many of the Congress members attend via hologram projection and vote remotely. We're taken through the motions of these discussions as a proposal to increase the resources assisting Acdelic is currently on the table. In orderly and amicable conditions, the motion is discussed and put to a vote where Gestalt itself acts as the mediator, displaying the percentage vote for approval. This motion is passed and the rest of the conference is skipped until the next major topic of the meeting, Nicola proposing an expansion of the military. The conference soon comes to a close, but one member chimes in to inquire why so many resources were allocated to celebrating Commandant's return from Atlantis. Hassan calmly explains that Commandant represents the hope of the people, and that hope is a powerful weapon for morale and motivation of both the military and the common citizen. The Congress member rebukes this idea, referring to hope as trivial. This causes Hilda to interject, asking if the member has ever read mythology. Hilda explains not only that hope isn't trivial, it's vital to the goal of reclaiming the planet. Nicola adds that Kurano has been extremely aggressive with their actions. Thus, the more Gray Raven is lifted up as the hope of humanity, the less leverage Kurano has to make an attempt at regaining control of Commandant. With the WGC meeting adjourned, Hassan, Nicola, and Hilda speak alone, with Hassan noting it's been quite some time since the three of them could have a chat. Hilda reminds him that private conversations can easily create bias, something as she, the head of the control court, must abstain from unless it's of dire importance. This particular chat does fall within those parameters, as the matter of importance to be discussed is what was found within the Omega File obtained from Atlantis. From here, we cut to Colin's study, where he tosses a folder of files away, casually stating that all the data they've been able to pull from Luna is nothing but an empty shell. This is our first open hint that Kureno has in fact gotten a hold of Luna, though the details of that matter are not elaborated upon at this time. We get some amusing theatrics from Collins, as he is often wont to do. Rebecca states that the data they've extracted appears better than any existing frame, but Collins says he's not interested in producing a stronger construct. Instead, Collins wants to see humanity evolve to the level of the Ascendants. He believes this is their chance to free humanity from its limitations of the prior 100 millennia, and Luna is the key to such a lofty goal. Rebecca reminds Collins their situation is currently in dire straits. Commandant has become more or less untouchable since his return. This sparks a dramatic performance moment where Collins cries crocodile tears as he wistfully speaks of the anticipation of having access to a treasure trove, but with no way to find the keyhole. Rebecca is unamused, but Collins assures her that Commandant will eventually find his way within their grasp once more. Rebecca jokingly asks Collins to try and wait for this scenario with some class. This prompts Collins to get up, take a bow, and change into a fresh but identical looking suit. There's an interesting exchange here as Collins explains that clothes are a cage of human morality, used only to distinguish them from the monkeys within a zoo's cage. Eventually, Collins asks Rebecca what she thinks of the floating treasure Parliament is hiding. She states that she's not sure, but whatever it is, Collins' actions have allowed Parliament to retrieve a great number of things. Collins gives a snarky reply of, "Oh, lots." Quick editor's note here, I couldn't help but keep reading this line as loots instead of lots, and now I can only imagine Collins speaking like he spends his free time playing World of Warcraft like it's 2005. Collins informs Rebecca that he'll leave the decision of when to retrieve the fruits of Parliament's labor at her discretion, telling her nothing is off the table and that he'll wait for the good news. Collins departs and Rebecca looks over to the terminal on his table, which is currently refreshing different confidential journals the Science Council has submitted to Parliament. She idly remarks that Collins is still, quote, the same after all these years, before taking the terminal and exiting the study. We then cut to Hassan, Nicola, and Hilda studying the test results on the Omega file. The Science Council has finally managed to reproduce the phenomena that was originally observed at Atlantis, and this imparts upon us a massive revelation. Babylonia has discovered a possible way to absorb the punishing virus. For the first time, it appears humanity may have the means to create a weapon that can directly attack and defeat the punishing virus. Nicola says they have no time to waste, and Hassan quickly agrees, stating that the Science Council will receive the highest priority for their research and needs. The sooner these weapons can be developed, the sooner Babylonia can take the fight directly to the virus itself. Hilda points out that this is a massive move, and is almost certain to draw the attention of the bloodthirsty sharks lying in wait. Nicola responds that while Kureno will clearly want the Science Council's collective research, the WGC will desire Kureno's data, and he sees this as an opportunity to draw them out and figure out what they've managed to discover behind everyone's back. All they need to do is play along, a sentiment that Hilda echoes. I appreciate that despite minimal introduction to Hilda, we're shown immediately that she is extremely sharp. It's not often a character in a position of power shows such careful consideration for all the pieces upon the chessboard, and Hilda does so right from the moment we're greeted with her presence within the story. Next, we're cued into a conversation between Hassan and Asimov. It's kinda wild that this is my first chance to talk about Asimov in the Lore series, as not only is he often a notable character in almost every chapter, being the lead researcher for the Science Council, but he's honestly become one of the characters I enjoy and appreciate the most in the overarching story of PGR. Asimov explains that he's created encryption on the Omega file that changes every millisecond so that Kurano has no chance of gaining illicit access. They would need to decrypt it tens of thousands of times after just one day to learn anything of its contents. More importantly, Asimov notes that they'll need more samples to properly engineer the weapons to directly combat the virus. Data from the hetero creatures, the Hive Mother itself, and the remains they obtained from the aftermath of the underground battle in Chapter 14 are simply not enough. Hilda offers her own input on the data sent to her by Asimov. The cause of Chrome's Inver device overload was due to the Hive Mother maintaining a fate connection to another entity outside the underground facility, a connection similar to the one shared by the Terragoda Queen and the Polyphage. This means, in essence, damaging one entity should damage the other. Hilda believes the abnormal Inver device behavior lends credence to the idea that the hetero creatures have a tribal-like survival instinct. If one is wounded, it sends that data to the others so that they might learn and adapt. This implies the hetero creatures have evolved to a very high level of intelligence, and may mean there are multiple Hive Mothers, or that the hetero creatures might all have multiple bodies. This is an important bit of info, as evolution is a core theme throughout the events of Evernight Beat. Hilda theorizes that the virus is emulating humanity's tree of life, which leads Asimov to deduce that there could be complete or even fully evolved versions of the hetero creatures. We then watch Asimov viewing a feed on his terminal of the task forces eagerly awaiting deployment. A major step forward in the battle against the punishing virus is obviously at hand, and mobilizing a mass force shows how much Parliament values the findings within the Omega file. In the midst of this scene, Asimov notices a pink-haired construct on the stage, checking off a roll call of the various task force members. This construct has a control court symbol on her uniform, and Asimov gets a strange feeling when she directly gazes at the camera feed displayed on his terminal with a smile, almost as if she were looking beyond the camera. Before Asimov can linger on this thought for long, the construct's duties have been finished, and she departs. Asimov, wishing to get back to work on his new obsession that is the Omega file, is asked by Hilda if he'd answer a question honestly, as his position as the head researcher of the Science Council is of great importance. Before Hilda can make her inquiry, Asimov responds with a thought-provoking line. "Science is a torch that lights the way to humanity's future, not a wind that fans the flames of some civil war." The story then pivots to a now fully reunited Grey Raven squad. A series of flashbacks plays out, showing us what life has been like for Commandant and his loyal teammates since his successful return from Atlantis. Upon returning, Hassan informs Commandant that he and his team can finally take a well-earned rest, and that a grand ceremony will be held in the coming days to celebrate the accomplishment of retrieving the Omega file. Hassan reminds us that this ceremony will not only raise the hope and morale of the people, but serve as a reminder to Kurano that Commandant is beyond their reach. This is a subtle part of this particular moment in the story, but I think it really highlights the extreme game of chess being played in the shadows by all the major parties of power. We also get short glimpses into the various missions Grey Raven has been assigned since their return. They've been traveling between the newly constructed conservation areas in an attempt to stabilize their expansion, as humanity slowly attempts to reclaim the Earth's surface. During one of these missions, Grey Raven runs into a grandmother and small boy whom they originally met back in No Man's Land. That encounter was mired with hostility and distrust, but now has turned into one of admiration and gratitude. The grandmother even offers Commandant a cup of freshly made corn soup, a product of seeds that the conservation area has been supplied with by Akdelic. While these missions of raising morale and providing hope to the people serve a worthwhile cause, it's impossible for the restlessness to not set in for a Grey Raven squad that feels it should be on the front lines. aiding their comrades in the ongoing battles against the punishing virus and the Ascendants. In a way, the pedestal this team has been raised upon acts as its own cage. Lee, Lucia, and Liv all acknowledge they could be doing so much more if they were not confined to these safer operations, centered around being a pillar of hope for the rest of humanity. Despite being put in these safer mission conditions, Grey Raven is keenly aware they are caught in the middle of a volatile stalemate between Parliament and Kurano. Parliament's primary goal is keeping Grey Raven safe, hoping to hone them into the perfect weapon to comfort and motivate the masses, while Kurano bides its time, hoping to regain control of Commandant's unique mind connection prowess. From there, they can hope to continue their pursuit of the next evolution in humanity, which they believe is only possible with deeper knowledge of the Ascension Network. Beyond this game of political movement and power brokering, there are underlying worries among the team. New dead zones have been discovered along the Akdelic Railway, and confirmed sightings of stagnant corrupted have been located in multiple areas outside of the conservation zones. It's clear to Commandant and his team that something is changing on the surface. These recent memories are interrupted as we return to the present time, where Commandant's terminal has begun ringing in the middle of the night while he was finishing verifying the mission logs of these recent morale-boosting events. Chrome has contacted Commandant to bring him up to speed with the latest information on the Hive Mother. Other Hive Mothers have been located by the various task forces, but none were as developed as the one from the encounter within the underground sewer system. We're also given more insight into the base functions of the hetero creatures themselves. It's become clear that the hetero creatures are capable of multiplying, and given the advanced nature of the Hive Mother fought by Chrome, it's likely the Ascendants can expedite the growth of these creatures. This puts the search for the most advanced Hive Mother on a clock, and thus Chrome explains why he's requested Grey Raven's aid. At this point, only the new specialized frames, Glory and Plume, are capable of destroying the Hive Mother threats. In addition, the connection that the Hive Mothers have to the Ascendants is the direct cause of the invert device overload that Chrome experienced during his battle. This means a Commandant who is capable of connecting to the Ascendants without infection is a hard requirement to keep the new specialized frames from succumbing to corruption. Commandant chimes in with his own deduction that Grey Raven returning to the front lines and securing a victory against a powerful and dangerous enemy will be the strongest morale boost Babylonia's soldiers could receive. In addition to all of this, Strikehawk has been effectively grounded, as without a guarantee that the Glory frame will not overload during another hetero mother encounter, Parliament has become unwilling to risk their newest technological advancement in further battles. Grey Raven appears to be the only realistic option for tracking down the advanced Hive Mother, so Commandant agrees to meet Chrome over in Asimov's lab to lay out all the current information. Asimov's lab is in much more disarray than usual. Folders and machines are strewn across the premises, highlighting just how much time and effort Asimov and the Science Council have dedicated to the research on the Omega file. One of the assistants ushers Chrome and Commandant to a small cleared space among the clutter and begins a briefing. To further progress on the research of the Omega file, more samples must be collected for study. Of the potential options, hetero creatures provide the best data due to them evolving directly from the virus itself. A map is put on display on a nearby terminal as the parties discuss the most likely location for an advanced Hive Mother to be in hiding. Chrome deduces that during Strikehawk's first infiltration of the sewers, that it's likely Vonnegut would have been checking up on the most advanced Hive Mother. Combining this knowledge with the signals they track to match up with Vonnegut's, a hypothetical location is narrowed down. We're also clued into what the Science Council has learned about the innate abilities of the hetero creatures, those being the ability to output high concentrations of the punishing virus, and their ability to interfere with magnetic fields. This lines up with the anomalies Grey Raven has witnessed on their recent missions. Utilizing the confirmed locations of the dead zones, along with the data Strikehawk and Grey Raven have provided, Asimov creates an equation to triangulate their combined efforts to find the most likely location of the Hive Mother. An exact spot is marked on the map that fits within the variables everyone has provided. Meanwhile, Celica is currently briefing Hassan on the progression of restoring the conservation areas and the supply lines on the surface. Hassan is convinced that the turning point in the war against the virus could be arriving very soon. Nicola next inquires about Grey Raven's discovery of the Hive Mother's potential location. We learn the coordinates point to Puglia Forest Park, an area yet to be part of the restoration efforts due to its rough terrain and lack of valuable resources. The Woodcock Task Force is near the park and have been sent in to confirm signs of hetero creatures. Nicola agrees that if Grey Raven has requested a mission to return to the front lines, that this is their best course of action. Hassan notes that Harley Joe's team should be reporting in shortly, but before that he and Nicola are interrupted by Hilda, who has an urgent video file for them to view. Hassan immediately feels a sense of unease as he notices the warning attached to this video file, remembering back to the last time he saw such a warning, the data relating to Luna. The initial images of this video feed are haunting. Plant life glows with an eerie red hue of the punishing virus, and the Science Council has confirmed that they're actually made of hetero creatures mimicking the flora of the overrun park ruins. This scene goes from bad to worse, as Harley Joe and the Woodcock team have located signs of human activity, notably scavengers' clothes and campfires. A chilling scene ensues as human-like figures wearing scavenger capes appear. Harley Joe instructs them to stay where they are so his team can lead them to safety. It's here that the frightening truth is unearthed. These are not humans, but evolved hetero creatures. Dubbed heterosapiens by the Science Council, we watch in terror as not only have these creatures rapidly evolved, they are able to mimic human speech, and a beating red core glows from their chests like a heart that constantly pulsates. The creatures soon attack Woodcock, and it's almost immediately clear that Harley Joe and his squad are not capable of taking down these new threats, so he orders a hasty retreat. Hilda states that the control court suggests deploying the Longinus arsenal to obliterate the park ruins and to keep these creatures from spreading and evolving further. Doing this, however, would almost certainly destroy the advanced Hive Mother, which would be a massive setback on the research progress of the Omega file. Hassan and Nicola deem that price one that is far too high to pay, and say the Longinus arsenal should be relegated to a worst-case scenario option. Hassan issues his orders: send the task forces to the park ruins, defeat the advanced Hive Mother, and return with the samples the Science Council requires. The scope of this mission is expanding rapidly, and Hassan knows a large force is going to be required to ensure success. He looks to Nicola's opinion for who should lead this potentially deadly deployment, and Nicola pauses briefly before offering an answer: Hans. The veteran presence of Hans should prove invaluable. With the magnetic interference guaranteed to be a factor, remote command will be difficult, if not impossible. Nicola feels Hans is the only suitable commander to make the necessary judgment calls while on the field, which could include determining when the Longinus arsenal should be deployed if the task forces are unable to stop the growing army of evolving hetero creatures. Hassan has doubts on Hans's chance of surviving such a mission, and requests his presence on the bridge to discuss the plans of this operation. After a short brief, Hans simply says, "whatever it takes," and when asked by the president if that includes his own life, he pragmatically states that soldiers are humanity's leverage in the fight against the virus, and to be utilized to the fullest is his ultimate wish. I feel Hans serves a really important place here beyond being chosen as the commander for a mission that cannot fail. We've been through many battles in the story to this point, but I feel it's easy to overlook that at the end of the day, this is a war between humanity and the virus itself, along with the agents of the Ascension Network. While the commandants and various constructs are presented as soldier-like in this story, Hans brings a more traditional military veteran look to the task force many members. He's a model soldier, and a firm reminder that there is a very real war of attrition being fought in between these epic clashes of superhuman constructs. Hans requests 3 more squads be deployed under his command in addition to Grey Raven. Harley Joe's Woodcock Squad, as their knowledge of having already been to the ruins will provide valuable intel. Vanessa's Egret Squad, who he feels are best suited to overpower these evolved threats with their superior firepower. Lastly, Simon's Dark Ares Squad. Despite Simon's weak physical constitution, his mind beacon strength is second only to the Commandant's. He provides an important insurance policy in the event the virus overloads the Inver devices or Commandant's mind beacon. Hassan approves of Hans' choices and wishes him a safe journey. From here, we once again turn to the ruins of Puglia Forest Park, where Grey Raven has made its long-anticipated return to the front lines. Hans addresses his new forces and lays out the mission objectives and protocols. Hans' words command respect, and he reminds each squad his orders take precedent over any other decision. 2 main objectives lie ahead for these teams, the first being to locate, destroy, and retrieve a sample of the advanced Hive Mother. The second is to find and rescue as many scavengers as they can within the confines of the Central Purification Filter Facility at the center of the ruins, which has been designated as CPF-40. During the brief, bit domain nodes are passed out to the squads. Hans reminds his forces the importance of this mission, but states clearly that if he deems it no longer viable, the order will be given to deploy the nodes and allow the Longinus arsenal to obliterate the entire area, including the Hive Mother. The stakes are astronomical for our heroes, as Hans warns them that should they fail and the bit domain nodes cannot be activated, Babylonia will carry out mass orbital strikes, turning everyone, friend and foe, within the park ruins to ash. With the goals clear, Hans orders the forces to gear up and get to know each other. The mission will commence in 10 minutes. The teams are already on edge, knowing the monumentally difficult objectives that await them. The ice is broken amongst the squads in a strange and rather intense way, as Commandant senses an attack aimed at his neck. With quick action, he takes down his assailant, who happens to be Harley Joe, wanting to test the Commandant, who he refers to as Chief, with an unsharpened combat knife. Harley Joe's aloof nature is on full display despite the gravity of the mission, as he clearly tries to lighten the mood before the operation begins. We meet Harley's partner, Yata, who we've met briefly in an earlier chapter during an encounter with Murray where she remained off-screen. So this is our first time actually seeing the construct with her multiple sets of arms. Also, can I just say, I'd completely forgotten about this original design of Yata's frame, and I just have to ask, why have you deprived us of this buff, mature-looking Yata, Kuro? Her playable version is such a stark contrast to this original look. You nailed this design in one, Kuro. Give us back buff, mature Yata. Introductions are made, and we learn Harley Joe is from the same graduate class at FOS as Commandant. Harley admits the hetero creatures have him scared shitless, not due to their haunting features, but simply the unknown nature of the rapidly evolving species. We soon see Simon vomiting yet again, admitting the transport craft had given him motion sickness. Harley notes that Simon looked fine during the briefing, and Simon humorously shares that Hans looked scary, so he held it in. 10 minutes have passed, and Hans orders the teams to group up. Harley takes this moment to share some intel that was not in the video recording from their earlier deployment. While trying to clear out the heteroplant-like creatures, this resulted in red liquid spilling from them, which raised the punishing concentration in the area. We're next introduced to Vanessa, the Egret Commandant, who reports that air approaches are officially off the table. The hetero creatures have been turning themselves into anti-air cannons and firing themselves as artillery to bring down any airstrike. These hetero creatures are rapidly showing more and more intelligence and adaptation, and the mission feels even more vital with this information revealed. Hans orders everyone into formation, with Grey Raven at the center. They're told to conserve as much strength as possible due to the fact that Lucia's plume frame is the only one capable of dispatching the advanced Hive Mother. After some minor engagements with the hetero creatures, a recording has been discovered by the ground forces. It shows the red tide having resurfaced, with hetero sapiens rising out of its viscous fluid as it breaks down the matter of anything it touches, corrupted, living, or inanimate. It's here that Hassan checks in with the ground squads, informing us of some very dire news. Small red tides have been forming in any area with high punishing activity. This is raising the overall concentration of the virus and producing the hetero sapiens at a rapid rate. The hetero creatures appear to be directing the red tide, essentially making it a mobile army that can produce its own soldiers at will. This revelation helps explain the various dead zones that have been popping up, and it's clear the stakes have risen exponentially. Hans requests analytical data from the earlier engagement, and this prompts Liv and another construct named Eleanor to step forward, as they have useful intel to share. Liv explains that while it was originally thought that the hetero creatures lacked any sensory organs which would allow them to ignore pain, it's actually the polar opposite. When harmed, the hetero sapiens send out powerful signals through their nervous systems. Instead of these signals terminating in their own brain, it appears to stop at their umbilical cord. The hetero sapiens are effectively acting as an insect hive mind, uploading their stimuli to a centralized system. It appears the only way to do substantial damage to these evolving creatures will be to dismantle their umbilical cords, denying the stimuli they experience a chance to be uploaded to the central nervous system. Hans realizes this intel will be invaluable to the other squads on the surface trying to combat the hetero sapiens that are rising from the red tides, and deems sending it out a primary objective. The heavy interference will make communicating these findings difficult, but thankfully Harley Joe has a trump card. He takes out a small device and asks the teams to try communicating without utilizing their audio or vocal modules. These devices can enhance direct comms via amplification, so Harley plans to deploy multiple instances of them to create a communication mesh. This should allow the task forces to upload their findings to Babylonia. The goals for this operation become clear. Infiltrate CPF-40 and relay the newly found information on the hetero sapiens to Babylonia via Harley's devices. As the teams get closer to the purification filter, more and more waves of hetero creatures attack, trying to deny any entry into the facility. Upon reaching CPF-40, we find it completely overrun with the red-growing plants and the punishing virus. Hans decides to call an audible here. Egret will remain outside, acting as a surface team to protect the other teams as they infiltrate the filter and search for the Hive Mother. Harley and Yata are ordered to climb the facility and secure an alternative exit point through a gap on the higher levels. Dark Ares and Grey Raven will follow Hans inside. Grey Raven, however, will continue to limit engagement until the time comes to attack the hetero mother. If all goes according to plan, the infiltration teams will deploy the bit nodes after securing CPF-40. This will allow Babylonia a chance to deliver a decisive blow against the hetero hive mind and its ever-evolving creatures. The teams proceed to their designated assignments, and the infiltration squad steps inside the purification filter facility, with Simon and Commandant acting as the only protection for the constructs to avoid corruption. Now, if you have a keen eye for the details of any main chapter within PGR's story, you've probably noticed by now that we're lacking in a main character of sorts. For this chapter, we have multiple task forces working in unison to try and stave off the ever-evolving threat of the hetero creatures. This is perhaps Evernight Beat's most bold and brilliant story play, as our main character does not once appear within its standard chapters. So, to that end, let us roll back the clock a week before the mission to CPF 40 and catch up with an old friend who is ready to put on a truly memorable performance, as we turn our attention to the hidden side of Chapter 16 and its connecting interlude. A week prior to the events of Chapter 16's main story, we find a cloaked Roland wandering the streets near the park ruins area. He casually eliminates a swarm of hetero creatures before coming across a small group of scavengers gathered around a campfire. Roland quietly murmurs to himself that it's time for the final performance. Roland consistently has been a fascinating and complex character throughout the story of PGR up to this point. Despite him being a regular player in the various chapters, we know surprisingly little about Roland himself. His line about this final performance is one of many that have hinted towards his background in acting and theater, but we've never really gotten down to brass tacks about who Roland truly is or what has happened in his past. The last time we saw Roland, he was awakening to find himself at the camp of the Merciful One after he had collapsed from the wounds sustained in his battle against the second Terragota Queen. This second chance given to him by the Merciful One, or as he refers to her as, the Pure White Agent, has allowed Roland the opportunity to meet with Vonnegut, an exchange we watched unfold at the end of Chapter EX05. We flash back to that very conversation right after Roland has agreed to collaborate with Vonnegut and his followers. Vonnegut is surprised at Roland's decision to only take a fraction of the power offered to him. Roland feels relying too much on this boon from Vonnegut will compromise his chances of pursuing his in-game goal, that being reuniting with Luna. Vonnegut applauds Roland's persistence and restraint in his search for more power. A lot of cards are laid upon the table in this exchange. Vonnegut knows Roland is too clever to simply accept a gift of power with no scrutiny, and Roland is very aware that allying himself with Vonnegut is walking a perilous tightrope. Roland is simply doing what he believes he must to have any shot of finding Luna, a search that's been moderately aided by an additional gift from the Merciful One, that being the ability to still sense faint traces of Luna's mind signal. Roland is informed a more important Hive Mother lies undetected, but even Vonnegut is forced to admit that Babylonia has proven more intelligent than he originally gave them credit for. Losing the first Hive Mother in the sewers was an unfortunate outcome, but not one that can derail their greater goals. Vonnegut explains that Gabriel's fatal flaw was ignoring the will of the virus itself, and his pursuit of endless power over understanding the virus and the Ascension Network's higher designs resulted in his downfall at the hands of Alpha. Roland is surprised to learn that Vonnegut is simply waiting to see what emerges from the Mother, and remarks that he expected Vonnegut to be more of the type to desire full control over his own machinations. Vonnegut responds that before they are allowed to bear witness to what lies within this advanced Hive Mother, that there's another thing he should see. Throughout the hidden chapter, we're often shown recordings of Gabriel's memories, giving us greater insight into the development of the hetero creatures. The first of these memory playbacks highlights Gabriel's belief that the hetero creatures require no thoughts or emotions. They are meant to be pure apex predators, seeking their prey and ensuring their demise. We then cut to Vonnegut showing the advanced Mother buried deep in the depths of CPF 40. The Ascendants didn't actually choose this spot for her incubation. This is simply where the creature landed. Vonnegut's outlook on the hetero creatures contrasts vividly to Gabriel's. He considers emotions and free thoughts important attributes, and sees the future of the Ascension network requiring allies who can walk side by side with them, not shackled beasts to be sicked upon their enemies. To that end, Roland has been instructed to find and lure nearby scavengers into the presence of the advanced Hive Mother. Exposing her to humans has been causing her to respond and evolve accordingly. Whatever is lying within the Hive Mother is growing and adapting from this constant exposure. Cinderella has been attending to the Mother to oversee its incubation and evolution, so she orders Roland to clear out various corrupted around CPF-40. This way a new batch of test subjects can be led to the presence of Mother. Back in the present time of the hidden chapter, we find a cloaked refugee being shaken down by 3 scavengers. Fearing for his life, he empties his pack of supplies, which contains multiple useful items, including serums stamped with the world government symbol. The apparent leader of this group, Zach, threatens the refugee into revealing where he obtained such a prize. The refugee replies in a frightened and shaking voice that it came from CPF-40, and it becomes clear that this is actually Roland, putting on an extravagant performance to lure this new batch of scavengers into the presence of the advanced Hive Mother. The scavengers are highly suspicious of this new information, and we learn a bit more about their group dynamic in the process. Their apparent lack of trust in one another is shown in how they divvy up their supplies. Each member is in charge of one vital component: food, medical supplies, and weapons. This forces them into a binding agreement, as without all 3 of these key supplies, they would have no chance of lasting in the harsh conditions of the surface outside the conservation areas. The scavengers ask for the refugee's name, which Roland responds to with Rolmo. With the introductions out of the way, the scavengers demand Rolmo guide them to CPF-40. He of course obliges, thinking to himself that despite their alliance, that this group will end up like the rest. This process has played out 14 times already, and Roland has grown rather bored with the performances and their guaranteed outcome. We're then privy to another of Gabriel's memories, which recounts his first meeting with Vonnegut and the power that was bestowed upon him. It's here that Gabriel notes for the first time that he has experienced the rush of excitement as an emotion. Evolution is such a key theme in Evernight Beat, and these memory recordings are serving as a comparison point for the vast number of paths that evolution can walk. Gabriel consistently believed emotions were nothing but an obstacle to be overcome on the path to power, while Vonnegut shows clear value and interest in many more concepts, despite clearly being the most powerful agent we have come across in the story to this point. Back in the park ruins, Rolmo leads the 3 scavengers through the rugged terrain of the forest surrounding CPF-40. One of the scavengers, known as Beardy, steps through a rusted plate displaying a map of the forest park. While the map itself has been rendered useless due to the dense overgrowth, it cuts open Beardy's leg. This causes Zach to order a 15-minute break so his wound can be attended to. It's here we learn the 3rd scavenger's name, Cords, who dresses the cut on Beardy's leg. During this break, Rolmo is tossed half a hardtack, showing the trio are starting to lower their guard around him ever so slightly. As the group rests during this break, Zach reminisces about a movie he saw long ago, where the protagonist fights to reach the top of a mountain legends say is filled with secret treasure. At one point, the hero stumbles into a forest full of monsters that he battles for 7 days. The monsters apparently turn out to be the loss and weakness felt in his heart. Zach remarks about how bland the ending felt, but that it was a good watch overall. This scene feels mostly insignificant at first pass, but we watch Rolmo stagger a laugh during this impromptu film critic discussion. Calling Roland a fan of theatrics and performance would be an understatement. Up to the events of Fake Ascension, Roland has been very blatant about his love of putting on a good show. Acting as a constant antagonist in the most literal sense, we've been exposed to his almost cartoonishly villain performances more than a few times by now, so the intrigue only grows in wondering why this particular performance is worthy of some rather lengthy story beats. After the break, Roland continues to lead his marks closer to CPF 40. Soon the scavengers notice the plants now have an ominous red glow, and after accidentally stepping on a branch causes some viscous red liquid to seep from it, the scavengers have accidentally stumbled onto a harrowing scene. Multiple hetero creatures are crawling upon the forest ground, and upon seeing the intruders begin to mimic their behaviors and speech. Terrified, the scavengers open fire, which only causes the hetero creatures to violently chase after their assailants. The group flees after realizing they can't possibly gun down the large swath of hetero creatures. Despite being briefly separated from their guide and assuming he'd been torn to shreds by the monsters they'd stumbled into, Romo reunites with the group and finally leads them to CPF 40. Roland's inner monologue reminds us that the real performance is now about to begin, one that script has been fully written out from the moment he met up with this new trio. Roland informs them that the only way into the facility is via the air ducts. As they make their way through the maze of airflow vents, we see another of Gabriel's memories play out. This time, the Ascendant recalls meeting the Hive Mother for the first time, and wishing that he had Roland's ability to deceive and coerce test subjects to be introduced to it. Gabriel is yet again forced to admit that emotion could in fact be a useful catalyst. We also learn that Cinderelic has been overseeing the Hive Mother's evolution. Back in CPF 40, Roland has successfully lured the group within the towering facility. They soon come across signs of a shootout, including corpses of other scavengers. They do manage to find some rations and pistol rounds as they delve deeper into the purification filter's structure. Oddly enough, despite being dilapidated for some time, the fans continue to churn and the filter itself appears to be functioning, keeping the concentration of the punishing virus at manageable levels. This moment of relief is short-lived as the tower begins to shake violently, triggering alarms throughout the facility. The intercom recording notes that if damage to CPF 40 reaches over 90%, that the filters will cease to function. Things quickly go from bad to worse as red branches tear through a gap in the vents, aiming to lunge at Zack. He's quickly able to shoot them before realizing a mass of hetero creatures are also crawling through the vents, aiming to break in and engage the scavengers. Romo tells them to flee to higher ground, and he stays behind to clean up the stage, as it were, while Roland dispatches the hetero creatures, leaving the scavengers to their own devices acts as a test, and Roland is quite impressed with their ability to survive the trials thus far. Soon after, Romo once again reunites with his unknowing co-stars. The group manages to seal off the air valve at the perimeter of the tower, taking a moment to catch their breath. The steel plate they stand upon starts to collapse from the constant onslaught of the hetero plants ripping into the structure, and Cords nearly falls to a grisly demise before Beardy grabs him and pulls him back up to safety. Roland notices a small pouch that fell from Cord's pocket as he lost his balance. He hands this over to Beardy, who tosses it back to Cords, and we get a little bit more insight into this scavenger's background. The pouch contains hydrangea seeds that Cords himself developed. He promised his daughter one day that they'd plant this more sturdy version of the seeds and create a garden of beautiful blue flowers. We learn Cords had been conducting research in a small city, and while out searching for supplies, it was overrun by the corrupted. He never found his daughter and to this day does not know her fate. Cords mentions that he had heard rumors that people can see their lost loved ones within the red tide. He went searching for it but ended up finding nothing. Interestingly enough, Rolmo tells him it's best he found nothing, as nothing good can come from the red tide. I find this exchange fascinating, and I think it's pretty easy to overlook. Roland has already proven his performances are ruthlessly effective at leading new subjects into the presence of the Hive Mother. With these scavengers effectively already trapped within the hellish confines of CPF-40, he has no real need to indulge in the scavengers' personal pasts or experiences. Openly telling the group the dangers of the red tide may just seem like part of the performance, but it highlights that there's much more going on with Roland beyond following orders to help aid in the hetero mother's evolution. This feels like genuine input offered by Roland, and that only adds more to the context of what we'll learn about this ascendant very soon. As the group gears up to continue trying to escape the purification facility, the nearby elevator shaft is forced open, and scarlet-covered vines lunge forth to grab the nearest victim, who just happens to be Rolmo. He's just about to be pulled into the abyss of the elevator shaft, when he calls out to the others, "Run upstairs, you fools," right as he's dragged into the darkness. Roland emerges in the basement of CPF-40 with a graceful landing, where Cinderella awaits. He asks if his performance was satisfactory, and jests that she could find a way to make his exit more dignified. Cinderella scoffs, noting that with his abilities, he can depart at any time he wishes. Cinderella observes various monitors, most of which show very little activity as they both stand in the central array of CPF-40, where the Hive Mother continues to incubate its contents. One of the monitors shows the scavengers, still trying to escape and sharing their concern for Rolmo's fate. Roland is rather amused by this and compliments Cinderella for her camera work. We then learn that the Hive Mother is in its final phase of transformation, and within 4 hours the incubation will be complete. Being constantly exposed to new human stimuli has hastened the process greatly, and this goads Roland's curiosity as he boldly asks what exactly the Mother will create from its ongoing evolution. Cinderella explains that this is still Gabriel's original research, and she is simply finishing what he left behind. Roland offers a trade, explaining he watched Gabriel's every move as he developed the hetero creatures, and he'll happily share more about that process if she'll spill the details about the Hive Mother. Cinderella says that Vonnegut's orders were to, quote, "let mothers see humanity's potential." She then pulls up the final memories of Gabriel, recorded shortly after Alpha damaged his frame beyond repair. He laments that he will not see the punishing virus's final answer, and he's marked the location of Mother, knowing Cinderella and Vonnegut will continue the research, allegedly upholding a promise made to him by Vonnegut himself. The recording ends with Gabriel remembering how he became one of the Ascendants, recalling vague thoughts of being hit with a bottle and burned by lit cigarettes. The final thought centers on Gabriel noting how these useless memories still occupy his neural circuits. Before he can utter his final words, the recording cuts. Roland comes to the realization that whatever the Hive Mother is, it stands to be a much more dangerous threat than the Terigota Queen. Before he upholds his end of the bargain, Roland casually asks what Gabriel's final words were, and Cinderella cues up one final recording from his vocal module.
"This is the selection of a higher will. Time is running out. The real culmination of the virus's will soon come into being."
Back in the upper levels of CPF-40, the scavengers are desperately trying to find a way to escape the deadly facility. With the hetero plants blocking their original route, they know another exit path must be located if they hope to survive. Zack, feeling a sense of guilt for leading his cohorts into this situation, says he'll make sure they get out, taking out a notebook and drawing a crude map of the facility. He states their best option is the main entrance, and to open it, they'll need to find the central control room. To reach central control, they'll need to pass through an access corridor, which they find to be crawling with fish-like hetero creatures. Having found minimal supplies in the tower, a firefight is out of the question. Cords points out that the creatures look like deep-sea fish, and since they've witnessed the hetero creatures mimicking the species they appear as, he concludes that they won't rely on sight to locate their prey, but instead will rely on sound waves due to how little light is found within the deep ocean. The scavengers decide to use one of their explosives to distract the creatures so they can safely cross the access corridor. In a show of brilliant teamwork, Zack throws the explosive to the far side of the room, and Beardy shoots it with a pistol to detonate it. With the creatures swarming towards the sudden violent sound, the trio of scavengers quickly cross the long corridor. Roland, watching on the monitors in the lowest level, admits how impressed he is with the scavengers' ability to think on their feet and their teamwork. Cinderella scoffs, calling them a minimal threat, which causes Roland to retort, telling her not to underestimate those who can survive such a hostile environment. He coyly adds that this is what Vonnegut meant by humanity's potential. He even goes on to ask Cinderella if she'd like to wager on how far the trio can go. She, of course, has no interest, only caring about the progress of the hetero mother. Roland mentions how boring the whole situation is and likens it to talking with Gabriel. He then turns back to the monitors, encouraging the scavengers to put on an entertaining show. The scavengers finally reach the central control room, and Zack makes his way over to the main console, feeling a tinge of hope as it appears to still be active. While navigating the complex menus of the console, Zack realizes the main tower door has never been opened in the post-pandemic age. This implies that there should be no way the tower could still be active if its initial startup was performed so far back in the past. Zack explains that the CPF acts as a massive air conditioner, separating the virus from the other gases and sending them to the main filtration system. The centrifuges need constant maintenance to be sure the filter isn't overloaded, and in the aftermath of the punishing outbreak, there's no one who could have been maintaining such complex mechanisms. We're clued in here that Zack was an engineer who helped maintain the CPFs in the past. Now wondering where the virus is being filtered to, Zack continues searching the console interface, and soon the image of the Hive Mother appears on the screen, which causes multiple errors to flash on the overlay. Realizing the massive concentration of the virus dwarfs even the red tide itself, the true danger of the situation begins to set in. The progress bar on the screen showing Mother is already at 90%, and the scavengers know they can't possibly handle a threat of this magnitude. Beardy tells his cohorts that if such a threat is left alone, it might become a danger to the nearby conservation areas, which will be the main site of refuge for the trio if they can manage to escape CPF-40. Cords suggests that they try to call for help from Babylonia or anyone that could possibly receive an SOS signal. We here cut back to Roland watching these events play out on the monitors, and a nagging thought deep within the depths of his mind is displayed on screen. Of course I do. First the screen went black. After that the cameras kept changing, but I saw everything. Roland knows the communication signals are useless with the magnetic interference of the hetero creatures, and the final line of this deep nagging thought appears next. Anyway, please call the police ASAP. Roland feels a metaphorical pain in his gut, a feeling he was certain would never rise from the depths of his memories ever again. With a smirk, Roland stands up to leave the basement dwelling, stating his boredom with the current performance on screen. He takes a glance over at the schematics of the CPF tower on the wall, memorizing the location of the hidden fire exits. Roland is clearly conflicted about the events he's watched unfold, and to truly understand the nature of that conflict, it's here where I feel we should once again jump to a completely different story, containing the third key chapter that centers around the events of Evernight Beat. The hidden chapter has given us more hints than ever at Roland's background and true intentions, but to fully unravel the mysteries surrounding our theatrically talented ascendant, we'll have to go much deeper into the past. Roland's Interlude chapter, titled A Great Show, is an utterly fascinating backstory on a character who's remained frustratingly mysterious but consistently charismatic despite his role as a primary antagonist for Grey Raven and Babylonia. This chapter opens with a short speech about the nature of humans and their wishes. The first scene is rather wild, showing us a young Roland who's now dressed as a cop. He's currently being pinned down by a gangster with a gun pressed against his head, the gangster mocking him for meddling into their affairs, and oddly refers to Roland as a knight. Soon after, we're introduced to a new character, Mandhasti, the sheriff of this town and the king to Roland's knight. Mandhasti manages to talk down the gangster and de-escalate the situation instead of resorting to violence to rescue his partner, which I have to admit in 2026 is a real heavy reminder that I'm reading a work of fiction, but I digress. After the gangster departs, Mandhasti, who Roland often refers to with the nickname Mandy, checks on his partner, and Roland shares he was able to collect some important files, revealing a USB stick he kept hidden in his hand. Mandhasti applauds Roland for his bravery and service, but reminds him that his life is the most important thing of all. Mandy notes his concern for Roland due to seeing some visible minor injuries on his partner. Roland says there's no need to worry as he has some healing spray on hand. This would be an inconsequential bit of conversation, but Roland talks about the brand name of this spray and notes that it can be, quote, purchased at your local pharmacy, effectively doing an ad read mid-conversation. We soon get confirmation that what we are watching is clearly some kind of film scene, as Roland walks into an empty street where he patiently waits until he hears a single word in his earpiece. Cut. Soon after, we see Roland talking with the gangster who had him pinned earlier, and learn they're both actors in an ongoing reality show. Roland reminds him and the nearby crew that they need to do an ad shoot as per the director's instructions. Roland gathers everyone into their proper places and performs a dramatic live read, speaking about the magnificent reality show they've put on for the viewers, noting that they've watched Mandhasti grow from baby to adult. Not only have we gotten full confirmation that Roland was an actor prior to becoming an Ascendant, this particular show has a shocking premise. Mandhasti is the main character and is completely unaware his life is taking place in a city that's been converted into a massive film studio. This city is complete with hollow camouflage and multiple teams of staff helping with the shooting, the directing, all of it. This voyeuristic experience is a direct homage to The Truman Show, something the chapter indirectly references as the inspiration for this very series. This ongoing facade, dubbed Mandhasti Real Park, is a massive operation and is apparently one of the highest rated shows of the Golden Age. It's not all that surprising to discover Roland's acting background, as it's more or less blatantly hinted at dozens of times over, but the nature of his performance is one I certainly didn't expect. With over 5 hours until his next shoot, Roland requests permission for leave from a mechanoid near his living quarters. Roland wishes to use the downtime to try and call his younger brother. Initially, no one picks up, so Roland takes a moment to browse social media. Within the confines of Mandhasti Real Park, the local firewalls filter the content to only show positive interactions. Having learned some basic coding, Roland bypasses the network settings so he can get more real input from the viewing populace. Comments are mixed but mostly positive, with some pondering the human rights behind having Mandhasti unknowingly living his entire life within a reality show. Roland begins talking as if his brother had actually picked up, showing us his prowess as a performer. These words feel very genuine and quite believable to how an older brother would talk to their sibling. Some playful verbal barbs are thrown in during this self-monologue before Roland ruminates on how fake everything involved with Manhasty Rill Park is. This is an extremely open look into Roland's personal thoughts, speaking on what he wants to do when he gets home, how the sooner that someone slips up and reveals the secrets of the show, the sooner he can finally return to his family. Roland admits that he's paid extremely well, but he's growing tired of living in a fake world day after day. Just as Roland is about to terminate the connection, his brother finally picks up and we learn his name, Rolmo. As expected, Rolmo is bursting with excitement, sharing how their family were so enthralled with watching Roland and Mandy take down a set of criminals that they were cheering in their living room. This is a very authentic brotherly interaction. Younger brother admires the older. They tease each other, but they are genuinely glad to finally catch up. Rolmo even asks if Roland can spot him some money for a new game, as he spit his allowance on Roland's merchandise from the show. Roland's terminal then reminds him that he should be sleeping now while he has a break in his schedule, and he tells Rolmo he needs to go after agreeing to spot his brother some spending cash. We see another representation of Roland's inner monologue, asking him if the success of the show is due to him contributing to this facade. These moments of Roland's introspection are some of the most poignant themes of the story. There's a major emphasis on separating truth from fiction. We learn that Roland's signature hair tie is a look he started using on set because of his desire to keep the on-screen image of Roland separate from the real Roland, making sure they exist as two separate entities. The next line of Roland's inner monologue is an excellent encapsulation of the whole situation. Whatever is false should be labeled as such, and that which is true should remain true. The two must be distinguished from one another. Otherwise, once confused, the two will be nearly inseparable. Roland clearly has conflicted feelings about his work, and it's plain to see where blurring the line between truth and fiction could be an easy pit to stumble into. These thoughts are quickly interrupted as the actor playing the gangster in the opening scene, known as Neferti, forces his way into Roland's room, exclaiming that they have a Code 9 and an emergency meeting has been called. Mandy has grown suspicious of his life and has gotten in a car to drive as recklessly as he could just to see what would happen. Roland springs back into character and we transition over to the local detention center. Roland asked Mandy what he was thinking, and our main character admits that things keep ending far too perfectly for him. Everything always seems to work out. Mandy recalls seeing their old partner Kay crushed under a mechanoid. Kay has perished on the show, but the actor themselves is obviously fine. Manhasty caught a glimpse of the actor, and this is what has prompted his suspicions. Roland is able to calm Mandy down by grabbing his wrist through the fence of the detention cell. When Mandy remarks on the pain that Roland's grip causes, Roland tells him, "Good. That means what he's feeling is real, and he needs to get some rest before his hallucinations worsen." With the situation under control, Roland checks to make sure the camera crew got a good shot of the impromptu scene before returning to his quarters. Roland hasn't slept in over 20 hours, and he feels himself growing delirious. We get more interesting inner monologues, noting how Roland chose not to take a stage name, so his real name has developed into part of his public image as a key actor in the show. If his performances continue to be smooth, it could become difficult to separate his two identities, once again hearkening back to the theme of the true self balancing against the false self portrayed on the stage. Roland eventually passes out before he can even sip the can of espresso he got from a nearby vending machine. This rest is short-lived as he's awoken once more by the comms in his earpiece, with voices screaming something about the main character. As Roland tries to get confirmation of the situation, he looks past his now blank terminal to see Manhasty standing before him in his own quarters. Roland, in shock, asks Mandy what he's doing here. Mandy recounts going around on patrol. The street was bustling and busy just as it normally would be. He decided to loop back around and jump nearly 3 stories from a nearby building to confirm his suspicions. When he landed back on the same street, it was now completely empty. Mandy once again shares how everything is going too perfect. He is sure the world around him is false. So he broke out of the detention center to find Roland, the only person he can trust. Roland's silhouette darkens as he tries to come up with an excuse on the fly. Mandy grabs his shoulders, pleading for an explanation as he reminds Roland that he is his knight, and he'll believe anything that he says. Roland tells specific cameras to power off and to begin the playback of, quote, memories. He then activates a button on his police baton and jams it into Mandy's gut. Mandy twitches and screams before collapsing, and the next real swerve in this admittedly twisted plot is now revealed. Mandy is actually a mechanoid, which has allowed Roland to incapacitate him with an EMP. Roland retrieves the memory chip from Mandy's head, which is now cracked open slightly from collapsing to the ground. Roland is clearly shaken by this, his inner monologue stating that it felt like he stabbed a living human with a knife. After steadying himself, Neferti enters. Roland hands over the memory chip and tells his cohort that he needs to go to the lounge and rest. We learn that this scenario has played out many times in the past. The first time Roland was forced to incapacitate Mandy, he vomited his guts out from the trauma of the episode. Neferti informs Roland that the nearest lounge is next door and that it's already been prepped for him. He offers some comforting words as well. I know you can't share your pain with your family, but I hope you can at least get some shut-eye. Roland responds to this with, I'm a professional. He takes a last look at Mandy, noting how even though his glass eyes have no spark or movement, he can't help but feel like the mechanoid is looking directly at him. Within the confines of the lounge, Roland is once again vomiting profusely as he recalls what's transpired. We see flashbacks of Roland meeting his partner for the first time and becoming his knight. Multiple scenes play out where Mandy can't believe his knight would betray him, including what has just occurred in Roland's quarters. Keeping this Truman Show-like secret from a human for an extended time would be nigh impossible. The dark secret of Mandhasti Real Park is that its audience has no idea the main character is a mechanoid, and anytime he manages to unearth the truth of his life, his memory is wiped and he's reprogrammed. Roland only gets access to these lounge accommodations when he's had to reset Mandy. His job and his role are one lie after another. He perpetuates falsehood to his partner in every scene, and the nature of that falsehood is further obfuscated from the audience. This has clearly taken a horrific mental toll upon the young actor. After cleaning up his own vomit and crawling into the bed within the lounge, Roland rolls up his sleeve, revealing multiple scars, most of which have been self-inflicted. Roland recalls how Mandy is more genuine, more human despite being a robot following a script. Roland, meanwhile, plays the role of deceiver, not just to Mandy, but to himself, to the audience, and even to his own family. The concept of this reality makes Roland feel sick, and he questions if he's actually even human himself. This trauma has set in so deeply that Roland resorts to cutting himself after these incidents of resetting Mandy, just to be sure that it's blood that drips from his skin and not mechanoid fluid. In between his magnificent performances, Roland is suffering from extreme mental distress, with no one he can confide in. Unable to sleep, Roland looks over to the full-length mirror in the lounge. We once again get inklings that Roland is suffering from symptoms of dissociative identity disorder. While Roland himself is struggling, the Roland in the mirror is far more pragmatic about the situation. The Roland in the mirror, whom the dialogue refers to as Roland with a question mark, asks why they don't reveal the truth, tell the world Mandy is a mechanoid and that he's malfunctioned. There's a simple answer to this question. They're deceivers. They deceive Mandy, the audience, everyone. Why do they do this? Also simple. Supply and demand. The people want entertainment, and as long as it's provided, who cares about the details? Mirror Roland even goes so far to state that if the facade is real enough, then Mandy comes off as even more real than if he was an actual human. Roland has goals and dreams, a family to go back to. All actors eventually leave the stage, says Mirror Roland, so just hang in there. Roland continues asking himself how much longer he can keep this up. He longs to escape this false acting prison and to see his loved ones, to go back to a normal life. This scene gives a lot of clarification to the moments we saw in chapter EX05, where Roland experiences an inner monologue with Hermano. The next day, shooting has resumed. Roland is struggling to stay awake, and Mandy notes how distraught he seems at all times. Looking down at the baton causes Roland to freeze, and he tells Mandy he left something at the station so he can run off. A nearby crew member is surprised at seeing Roland go off script, something he basically never does. Roland takes a moment to compose himself. We learn that he has spent over half his life in Manhasty Real Park. He takes a moment to refresh himself on the script, as his mental trauma and lack of rest have left him far from peak acting conditions. Roland's goal for this scene is to make Mandy question the validity of the world before he'll slash his own wrist with a fake knife that will draw fake blood, and this will hopefully convince Mandy that the world around him is genuine. Before this scene is acted out, two mechanoids begin shambling towards Roland, who he assumes are extras for the set. Something is off, however, as their eyes glow red and they act out of character. Roland can't get anyone on his comms, and soon a wrench flies by his head, thrown by one of the mechanoids. Something is clearly amiss, so Roland realizes he needs to get himself and Mandy to safety. Upon finding his partner, Mandy proceeds to slash Roland with the very same fake knife, causing the red dye melted against its surface to splatter across Roland's police vest. Mandy is devoid of expression and slashes at Roland again. This causes him to deploy his EMP baton and down Mandy for the second time in his many days. As red lights begin to surround everything around Roland, he looks to somewhere to flee for this sudden dire situation. Roland manages to escape to a nearby storehouse that appears to be in disarray. Unsure what has caused the mechanoids to violently attack, Roland searches for a way to contact the outside world. He finds a comms device used to connect with viewers. Fearing he has no options, he opts to contact any viewer who will pick up. This will void his contract and expose the lie, but that feels inconsequential given the circumstances. A woman Roland has interacted with before picks up, and when he asks her if she knows what's going on, she utters the very line that nagged in Roland's mind from the scene we left off in the Hidden chapter. Of course I do. First the screen went black. After that all the cameras kept changing, but I saw everything. Should I call the police? He tells her to please do, feeling a bit of ease set in that he's managed to take off the mask and finally expose the show for what it is. Those feelings are quickly erased, however, as the woman is convinced this is an elaborate setup for a sequel show. Roland's deception and performances have been so effective that even in the midst of a true emergency, his audience believes they're watching a stage. The bounds of falsehood and reality are crossing over on one another, and Roland remains trapped between them both. Panicked, Roland tries to contact anyone who will pick up to no avail. Running out of hope, a small miracle occurs when the next person to pick up on the comms is once again Rolmo. The ruse only continues, however. Rolmo is speaking in code-like language, requesting recalibration so it can encourage Roland. Roland isn't speaking to his younger brother, but a malfunctioning AI. The scene grows even more disturbing. Roland, realizing what's going on, tries to reach out on social media, only to find that every site has gone down. He even tries going to the official site of Manhasty Real Park, only to find it also gone. Instead, an advertisement is playing. The exact same ad Roland recorded earlier in the chapter, but this time Neferti is doing the read. It's here that the twisted truth is laid bare. It would in fact be impossible to deceive a human raised within a fake studio city for any significant amount of time. But what if the actual star of this premise was the one performing the deception? That is exactly what's been going on for half of Roland's life. Manhasty isn't the star of this reality show. Roland is. After vomiting once more at this horrific revelation, Roland tries to gather himself. He comes to the conclusion that if he can find his contract, it should contain the contact information for his family. Hoping this will give him some avenue to call for help and escape the nightmare that the studio has become, Roland begins scouring the network for his contract documents. Just as Roland manages to decrypt the security on the files containing his contract, a hole is punched through the door to the warehouse. Multiple mechanoids try to force their way through the door, among them being Roland's colleagues and the studio staff. Everyone in Manhasty Park had been mechanoids this entire time. Roland, realizing the lie he's lived for so long, and the imminent danger of the crazed mechanoids, asks himself if it would be better to simply get this boring life over with. Resigned to his fate, Roland closes his eyes and starts walking towards the mechanoids. He's shoved out of the way at the last moment, however, by Manhasty. Despite having a large piece of metal jammed into his torso, Mandy remains in character, reminding Roland that it's a king's duty to protect his knight. He tries to hold off the others, telling Roland to run. As he sprints through the studio city, we get a recounting of Roland's contract. His family agreed to have no contact with him, and even subjected themselves to aiding and training an AI so they could simulate communication with Roland while he stars in this utterly twisted performance. As I'm recording this in 2026, there's something a little too beyond the pale about a story revolving around creating fake versions of someone's family via AI purely for deceiving them with genuine communication that's been fabricated. And I'm thankful to see this concept presented in a very dark and mortifying way, as it should be. Eventually, Roland's body gives out from the exhaustion and he collapses to the pavement with the sound of mechanoids in close pursuit. The next thing we see is the hazy vision of two doctors preparing to operate on Roland and turn him into a construct. Roland was saved by the military after the attack on Manhasty Real Park and turned into a construct without his consent. We then cut to the adult version of Roland we've known throughout PGR's story, his vital functions returning and his mind stabilizing. His military squad has been wiped out, and he is the only survivor due to playing dead in the ruined area he finds himself in. Even after the truth has been laid bare, Roland still has to deceive to survive. It's a poignant message, reminding us that a life lived through falsehood is its own cage, and even escaping it does not guarantee the truth of reality can remain in clear view. Roland is fully infected by the punishing virus, and a large mechanoid is closing in, preparing to crush him. Roland is yet again resigned to his fate and lays flat, waiting for the infected mechanoid to put an end to his facade. As Roland closes his eyes, the opening speech of the interlude about the nature of humans and their wishes plays out once more. Roland sees a faint vision of Mandy in his mind, who calls him a liar. This sparks within Roland the will to fight, and just as he's about to be crushed, He stabs through the large mech with his own arm, tearing out its core and managing to save himself. Unsure how he knew to spot and target the core leaves Roland with more questions, but he's once again regained control of his frame. Roland's interlude comes to a close after seeing two large tufts of white hair floating through the other corrupted. His curiosity gets the better of him, and he fights through multiple swaths of corrupted to tail this mysterious entity. At the end of this fight, we see a calm Luna turn and look to Roland, asking him, "Why do you keep following me?" Now, I'm well aware the order in which I'm covering the various events that bind together to form Evernight Beat's story is a bit contrived, but this chapter is so unique in how it approaches its story that I felt this interlude deserved an entire section of coverage to set up the climax of the hidden chapter. A Great Show is an extremely twisted chapter that finally gives us insights into one of this story's most unique characters. The power of deception is a terrifying one to behold, and for the duration of this interlude, not only do we watch Roland deceive and be deceived constantly, we, the reader, are unable to tell what is false and what is true. Roland's talents as an actor are put on full display. His dedication to the craft of deceiving his co-star and his entire audience is both clear and potent. To realize this facade is itself another facade is a borderline unhinged swerve that I don't think any reader will see coming with their first experience of reading A Great Show. We've watched Roland throughout the story of Punishing Grey Raven evolve from out-and-out antagonist to something of an anti-hero to now a character that anyone with any level of empathy can sympathize with. The lines between character and actor are easily blurred, and Roland's backstory takes this to the extreme. Roland experiences almost bottomless guilt and disgust at the lies he perpetuates. He longs to escape the false world he spent nearly half his life in. To call his childhood twisted would be an egregious understatement. He's not only lived the lie within the lie, he helped spread it all, a fitting tale of tragedy for a talented actor unaware of where he actually stood on the grand stage. With our knowledge of Roland's past now laid out, we can properly turn our attention back to the finale of the hidden chapter. Despair has set in for the scavengers. No communication signals can break through the interference, and the doors can't be opened. It appears that CPF-40 will be their tomb. Zack, in a moment of determination, forces himself to stand and once again work upon the control console of the central control room. He thinks about how he never could have imagined a virus corrupting the machines he once maintained on a day-to-day basis. Realizing they can't escape the tower, Zack tells the others he plans to deactivate the centrifuges of the purification system, hoping it will cut off the flow of the virus through the umbilical cords attached to the hideous creature that's clearly drawing from it. As the centrifuges begin to shut down, alarms play in the basement where Cinderella is monitoring the situation. The cords attached to the advanced hive mother are beginning to wither and decay. Realizing the scavengers are to blame, she sings a lullaby, commanding the hetero creatures within the tower to head towards central control. The hive mother itself begins climbing the tower, intent on removing the threat to the life incubating within it. Back in the control room, the doors begin to shake with violent impacts. As Zack continues navigating the console to shut down the purification systems, Cords and Beardy barricade the door, and Cords takes out a photo of his daughter. Cords says he hopes not to see her on the other side, and Beardy, attempting to lighten the mood, talks about what a great movie this would have made. They'd be the heroes, and they even have the cliché moment of a character gazing at the picture of their child right before the end. Zack manages to disable the final centrifuge, but feels a sudden pain in his stomach. A scarlet branch has stabbed him from the vent above the console, and his comrades run to administer serum. Zack screams at them to stop, knowing it's already too late. Things grow even more grim as the door is forced open and Cinderelic appears, being held aloft by two of the hetero creatures. Cinderelic prepares to punish the scavengers for their unforgivable sin of harming Mother, but at the last moment, an explosion sends debris flying towards her as she floats, forcing her to abandon the attack. Roland emerges from the explosion in the wall, telling Cinderelic he'd like a word before she carries out their sentence. Zack, already suffering from infection and on the verge of death, recognizes Roland as their guide. Beardy and Cords grow angry at being deceived, but Roland, with his theatric flair, reminds them that he merely gave them intel. They're the ones who chose to follow the path it led to. Roland offers Beardy and Cords a chance to escape. If they'll leave Zack behind, he'll guarantee safe passage out of CPF-40. Obviously distrustful after what has occurred, the two refuse to leave their friend behind and would rather die together. Zack, clearly at death's door, tells them it's far too late and that they should save themselves. Roland, now amused by this cliche, "You go first, no, I'm not leaving you" scene playing out before him, wraps his chain blade around the two uninfected scavengers, swinging them into the basement below. Before he can regain his vision, Cords feels a cold object placed in his hand and a whisper in his ear. Walk along the direction shown in the picture. The basement has access to the outside. I've cleaned up the mess already. Don't be too grateful. Without the context of a great show, this would be an interesting but rather odd choice to see Roland make. He has nothing to gain from saving the men he lured in to act as more fuel to expedite the evolution of the Hive Mother, but he has a great deal to lose should he draw the ire of Vonnegut. The act of another performance centered around deception and falsehood clearly reignited the memories of his past, and I feel it represents him making a choice he could not have made of his own free will back in Mandhasti Real Park, the choice of ending the deception on his own terms. After helping the two men to their potential escape, Cinderelic confronts Roland, asking why he would let them go. Cleverly, Roland responds that this was the first time Mother has experienced the sensation of fear, something he says will be key to a proper evolution. In addition, even if the scavengers do escape, they are still well within the Hive Mother's sensory range, and she could experience even more new stimuli due to these being the first test subjects to survive an encounter in CPF-40. Annoyed that Roland's antics weren't part of the plan, Cinderelic demands this be reported to Vonnegut and makes contact with him immediately. Surprisingly, Vonnegut appears unbothered by the new development, going so far to applaud Roland's efforts and confirming that he'll uphold his end of their bargain with one another. Vonnegut instructs the two ascendants to gather the research materials and depart CPF-40. Babylonia has discovered Mother's location and is already en route. With the stage for the final act now set, Vonnegut proclaims that Grey Raven will be there to witness the final stages of Mother's evolution. We then turn attention back to Zack in his final moments as he stares up at the withering Heteromother. He can almost make out the shadow of the figure incubating within, but before it becomes clear, Roland returns. Zack pulls out a vial of serum, making a final request of Roland to deliver it to his comrades. Roland, thinking back to the group's dynamic of splitting up their supplies, notes that Cords was the one in charge of medical items. This gets a chuckle out of Zack, as he shares they all kept an extra vial of serum just in case, so if one should fall, that the others could survive. This is a final confirmation that the trio's bond was more tightly woven than Roland initially gave them credit for. Roland inquires why Zack would trust him after all this deception. Zack saw Roland save the other two scavengers, and while he doesn't have the time left to learn what kind of person Roland truly is, this is enough of a reason to trust him with a final request. Roland then brings up the movie the trio were discussing back at camp, asking if Zach would like to know how it was meant to end. Roland shares that the original ending for the movie was meant to be tragic, having the knight find no treasure within the tower and then perishing from the despair. The actor playing the knight disagreed with this script, saying that in a world full of tragedy, why does a movie need to make the audience feel sadness and hopelessness? The optimistic naivety of the actor convinced the director to change the ending, having the sleeping god awaken, and after witnessing the hope and struggle of the knight, the god realizes the power of hope in the hearts of humanity. The god gives humanity the kindling of more hope, telling them that the disaster will one day pass. Zach is rapidly approaching the end, yet he recalls the joy that can be found in film. As long as someone performs the role and people watch, the role can exist forever. These final words resonate with Roland, and he thanks Zach as he reaches down to take the serum with a line that truly hits home after the events of a great show. Everyone believes my lies, but none of them believe my truths. Zach's light fades, and Roland, looking up at the mother who is still observing, takes his cloak and covers the now deceased scavenger. Before he departs CPF-40, he quietly speaks a line we've heard many times over now. Este no es nuestro final. Punishing Grey Raven's script translates this statement as, "This is not our final destination." However, after I ran this by some native Spanish speakers, it turns out the actual localization should parse out to, "This is not the final act," or "This is not the finale," something that makes far more sense contextually given the themes around Roland's story. Back in the forest, Beardy and Cords are completely spent, having collapsed upon the rugged terrain. Ready to accept that their escape attempt has fallen short, Beardy prepares to pull the pin on their final grenade, choosing their own exit from the stage before the hetero creatures can catch up to them. At the last moment, Roland arrives and hands them the serum from their fallen friend. In spite of this last-second miracle, the scavengers lament that they have nowhere left to go. Roland points to the sky, where Babylonian transport craft are passing overhead. He tells them now is the time to call for help. The final scenes of the hidden chapter, combined with the incredible interlude, finally give us a powerful understanding of Roland as a character. Much like the hidden chapter of The Last Spark did for Lamia, these stories make us realize that some of the Ascendants are not inherently evil beings, intent on destroying humanity out of a malicious search for ultimate control and power. Roland, just like Lamia, suffered an incredibly traumatic and tragic childhood, culminating in both of them being turned into constructs just to survive the brutal world after the punishing outbreak. We've already witnessed Roland choosing a side in the battles that occurred during Fake Ascension. He had no qualms about battling a fellow Ascendant for the sake of staying true to Luna and her ideals. He's far from a hero, and he's caused his fair share of mayhem during his time as an Ascendant, but he's clearly forging his own path, seeking the hopes and dreams he longed for as a child, but was unable to achieve after he learned the brutal truth of how his family effectively sold him to a gilded cage disguised as a spotlight on the stage. But it's his compassion towards the scavengers that truly stands out as a turning point for Roland's character. Once again being forced upon the stage to create an elaborate script of deception ignites the memories of his past traumas, and we see for the first time Roland showing compassion towards actual humans. For all this amazing character growth we've now borne witness to, there's still the matter of the mission at CPF-40. So let us turn our attention back to the present time as we rejoin the Babylonian task forces infiltrating the towering structure in the heart of Puglia Forest Park. The main force has successfully made their way into the depths of the tower. Very early into the investigation, some constructs inform Hans that shotgun fire and dead heterosapiens have been found within the confines. Hans has this reported to Babylonia using the newly constructed communication mesh, and thus far the operation progresses smoothly. Commandant and Simon are keeping the construct's Inver devices in peak performance. Despite things going to plan thus far, we find Hans actively setting up the bit domain nodes. His inner monologue reminding us that should Grey Raven falter in their attempt to defeat the advanced Hive Mother, the entire park ruins must be obliterated to stem the tide of advancement by the hetero creatures. The time has come for Commandant and his team to confront the advanced Hive Mother. Upon locating it within the depths of CPF-40, it begins to speak in gibberish and protects its armored outer shell from any attack, acting almost exactly as the Mother Chrome battled in the sewers just weeks ago. Suspended by its countless umbilical cords, the Mother endures an endless assault from the Grey Ravens. Lucia and Liv have directly engaged the Hive Mother, while Lee has been setting up filtration devices to lower the punishing concentration within the Hive Mother's lair. After buying him enough time, these devices are activated, and this causes the Hive Mother to seize. Its thick armor plating pulsates with grotesque black liquid that seeps from the outer shell. This battle appears to be going quite well, but Commandant can't help but feel that something is off. It soon becomes apparent that the Hive Mother isn't protecting itself, but what lies within its massive pulsating structure. The Grey Ravens watch in shock as two human-like creatures are birthed from the advanced Hive Mother. This shock quickly shifts to an intense level of unease, as the two beings immediately begin using complicated speech, and appear both more intelligent and more dangerous than the Hive Mother itself. A new threat has been born on the side of the punishing virus before Grey Raven's very eyes, just as Vonnegut had predicted: the unidentified twins. This battle has quickly spiraled out of control, and the worst-case scenario has become reality. Grey Raven is immediately pinned down by the twins. The sheer volume of the punishing concentration emanating from their newly birthed bodies has rendered the task force constructs nearly immobile. The twins adapt and mimic Grey Raven's teamwork and fighting prowess, firing their own versions of bullets at the team to hold them in check. Despite having just given birth to these new terrifying enemies, the Hive Mother remains her own threat to our heroes as she instinctively protects her offspring. Before he can react, Commandant is stabbed through his flank by one of the Mother's slimy tendrils, as she openly states, "You will not harm my children." Despite the immense pain and blood loss, Commandant manages to load his gun with the experimental bullets developed by the Science Council. Grabbing the tendril that's bored into his flesh, he presses the muzzle up against the slithering appendage and fires, severing it to escape the Mother's deadly grasp. Soon after, the floor gives out, and the team is sent plummeting to the lower levels of CPF-40. Luckily for them, Dark Ares was prepared and waiting, managing to rescue the Grey Ravens from their perilous position. With the punishing concentration drastically lowered due to getting away from the twins' presence, Liv and Eleanor are able to perform emergency first aid. The tendril is extracted from Commandant, acting as the precious sample this mission had sought after from the beginning. Soon the entirety of CPF-40 is beginning to crumble from the intense battles and the rapidly rising concentration of the virus. Hans issues evacuation orders and commands the team to head for the upper levels so they can utilize the escape route secured by Harley Joe and Yata. A harrowing chase begins as the teams try to outrun swarms of hetero creatures pursuing them to the upper levels. Commandant has fallen unconscious, and the entire situation grows rapidly dire. With the Commandant no longer able to support the constructs, Simon is forced to carry the load of preventing their Inver devices from corruption, already showing multiple visible wounds from the chaos that has ensued within the tower. It's easy to overlook Commandant's injury at first glance here. We've watched him withstand near life-threatening wounds before, but this time it's clear his life is truly in jeopardy. Hans, realizing this is a fight that can no longer be won, readies the trigger for the bit domain nodes so he can signal Babylonia to deploy the Longinus arsenal and decimate the ruins of Puglia Forest Park, preventing the Hive Mother and her children from threatening the future of humanity. The dread truly sets in as the trigger doesn't activate. In the aftermath of the battles, the bit domain nodes have malfunctioned and will require manual calibration to go off. Hans knows he was chosen for this mission for this exact scenario, a scenario where a judgment call could decide the very fate of humanity in its war against the punishing virus. He orders the teams to continue evacuating. He will return to the lower levels himself and manually activate the domain nodes. Simon and the others, of course, immediately object, but Hans' veteran presence as the most decorated soldier and commander amongst these squads shines through. He reminds the others they have a mission to complete, and they will do so without fail, just as he will complete his. They will evacuate, and Harley Joe will secure the sample and see it safely delivered to Babylonia. Hans returns to the lower levels, his body already beginning to give out due to rapid infection, as the density concentration of the punishing virus only continues to rise due to the twins' birth and the masses of hetero creatures that have swarmed the facility. We bear witness to a fitting but tragic scene as Hans drags his dying body to the bit domain node. Hans and Hassan both knew this would be the final mission of Hans' storied career. There would be no victorious return from CPF-40. Yet, Hans can think of no greater honor or fitting in than to give his life to secure a victory for humanity. Bleeding from nearly every orifice, Hans finds joy in knowing his end will not come strapped to a hospital bed, plugged into various tubes as his life slowly fades away. With his vision rapidly fading, Hans manages to finish the calibration of the bit domain node, and just before his body gives out, the trigger for the Longinus arsenal is activated. A model soldier to the very last breath, Hans has completed his mission, and Babylonia has lost a legendary commander. The other teams have managed to escape CPF-40, and they sprint through the forest to escape the endless tide of heterosapiens. Forced to take down many swaths of the ever-increasing horde, there's only one thing on the mind of the surviving task force members: escape the forest and send the precious sample to Babylonia. After a narrow escape, the teams reach the border of the forest and get into a clearing. Harley Joe immediately sets up the rocket he and Yatta had built earlier and sends the sample into the stratosphere, where they pray it reaches the final destination of Babylonia's research teams. Despite the devastating losses, the task force team has completed their primary objective, and soon a transmission informs Harley Joe that a transport ship has picked up 2 scavengers from the park. A small bit of hope as we get confirmation that Roland's actions did in fact save Beardy and Cords. The positive news is quickly cut short as Simon soon collapses from the strain of maintaining a mind connection with so many constructs on his own. Blood seeps from his nose and ears, but the support constructs, including Liv and Eleanor, calm their fellow task force members, saying with proper treatment that both Simon and Commandant can be saved. This moment of optimism is brief as the group watches in terror as 2 figures approach their newly erected camp outside the forest. As they step closer, the grass and the air around them actively erode into deep red scars. The sheer output of punishing virus decimates all living matter in their presence. The unidentified twins have come to take vengeance upon the ones who harmed and stole a piece of their own mother. With nowhere to run, Grey Raven, Egret, and Woodcock prepare to engage the terrifying duo, giving all they can to protect the two fading commandants. There has perhaps never been a more one-sided battle in the history of the story of Punishing Grey Raven. Lee and Lucia valiantly give everything they have in combating the twins. Despite not having any stabilization support for their inver devices, they assault the twins with every attack and strategy they can muster, and we can only watch in horror as the twins display the terrifying power of an ever-evolving punishing virus. This is a battle that simply cannot be won. Lee and Lucia are easily beaten down by the twins, and here we watch a scene within the subconscious of Commandant, a symbolic image of Hans, Simon, and the other task force constructs who fell during the mission. At this point, we're completely in the dark on if Simon or Commandant have survived, or if we're witnessing their final inner thoughts. The nightmare continues as we are forced to watch a limping and defenseless Liv be battered and beaten by the twins. She's completely unable to fight back and unable to protect her beloved teammates. It's an utterly heartbreaking moment, and it really drives that securing the sample won't even act as a Pyrrhic victory when the price will likely include 4 of Babylonia's most elite task forces and their most decorated veteran commander. The twins grow tired of toying with their prey and prepare to deliver the final blow, when suddenly a burst of bright light erupts through the forest. The Longinus arsenal has finally deployed, and instinctively the twins run back to CPF-40, trying to protect their mother. For the moment, the various task force teams have been spared a grisly ending. Even the twins cannot outpace the blast of the Longinus, and the advanced Hive Mother, along with the entirety of Puglia Forest Park, is razed to the ground. Despite being caught in the blast, the twins easily regenerate themselves. With no mother left to protect, and their lives having barely begun, the twins set out to grow, evolve, and seek aid in their quests to deliver the final blow to humanity and its hopes of reclaiming the Earth. We're next shown the aftermath of the events within Puglia Forest Park. The rescue transport craft sent to retrieve the remaining task force members has crashed, likely taken down by the hetero creatures. The birth of the twins and the evolution of the virus is now spreading across the planet's surface at mortifying speeds. The newly established conservation areas and farms have been destroyed and abandoned. The optimism and hope that swelled within Babylonia after the mission from Atlantis has almost been completely stamped out. The triumph of finding the Omega File and advancing the knowledge of the virus itself and zero-point reactors feels completely insignificant in the face of this rampant destruction. This dread and hopelessness is amplified as we watch a broken Liv try to save any and all survivors she can find. A dying man begs her to bring him to the nearest water source, only for him to succumb against her before he can even take a sip. She then finds a small construct with white hair, triggering a memory where she had saved an almost identical-looking young girl in the past. Liv has been exposed to countless deaths and tragic losses as a medic, but her emotions in these scenes are soul-crushing. Even she can't shake the doubt that all these efforts were for naught, and in spite of it all, she continues to try and save anyone she can, despite the wounds on her frame exposing her metal skeleton and her joints sparking from the damage sustained in the battles prior. We have reached a true low point in the story of Punishing Grey Raven. It appears all could be lost in the chaotic aftermath of this mission. We briefly return to Babylonia, where an emergency meeting of Parliament has commenced. The populace is terrified and angry at the rise of the twins, and what they view as an abstract failure of the army to prevent this newest calamity. The Grey Ravens are in miserable shape. Lee and Lucia have stabilized, but Commandant remains in critical condition. We're brought up to speed on the status of the surface, as Gestalt explains to Hassan and the others that they'll be forced to think outside the box if they seek to preserve humanity and continue the fight to reclaim the planet. Somehow, Hassan manages to maintain a shred of optimism, feeling that humanity has not yet lost. But we are left to wonder how they can possibly rebound from such a devastating defeat against a new threat that appears untouchable in battle. The final scene of Evernight Beat shows us Roland walking across the red-scarred battlefield in the aftermath of the twins' onslaught. He holds in his hand the same vial of serum we watch Zack give him in his final moments.
「これって本当に悲惨な現実だね。絶望に打ち砕かれて再構築された世界。これが君の見たいものかい？君ならきっとこういうはずさ。それじゃ幕を上げて願い事を叶えに行こう。
Evernight Beat is a chapter that makes incredibly bold choices, full of ramifications that will impact the entirety of Punishing Grey Raven's story moving forward. The whiplash this chapter induces after the relative triumphs of The Last Spark are practically guaranteed to catch readers off guard. We go from immense hope and optimism to watching the systematic decimation of Babylonia's strongest soldiers in a single chapter. At its heart, this is a story about evolution, the most natural aspect of any living entity. Babylonia has been evolving their tools and abilities to fight for the Earth via new knowledge and research, a topic that has been on full display after the successful recovery of the Omega File and the advancements in understanding zero-point technology. A powerful, albeit unnatural form of evolution to be sure, but one that gave us a high dosage of optimism after the events of the last spark. Of course, the real star of evolution here is none other than the punishing virus itself. I find it extremely appropriate that the tide has turned in this ongoing war purely from the evolutions we have watched unfold up to this point in Punishing Grey Raven. Viruses are humanity's most deadly foe in all of history. They are ruthlessly efficient killers of any organism they can infect, and they have remained as such for our entire existence due to their ever-constant ability to evolve their very genetic makeup. While Babylonia seeks answers from humanity's past mistakes, the punishing virus only looks forward for new vectors of infection. What originally started as a war against mostly corrupted mechanoids has quickly spiraled into a deadly race against the speed of evolution itself. Gabriel's research may have turned out to be very flawed and left incomplete, but he firmly showed us that the punishing virus has a will of its own, and that will has given birth to new threats that even the Ascendants themselves likely did not see coming. For me, however, the most bold and intriguing aspect of Evernight Beat is the story of its main character, Roland. The actual battles and key missions of Chapter 16 require an incredibly large cast of characters to participate in, as the stakes are risen immensely and rapidly throughout the main side of the story. I mentioned at the start of the video that setting the stage is critical to a good story and performance, and Evernight Beat has absolutely done so, showing us the absolute lowest of lows for our heroes fighting on the side of humanity. The absolutely wild choice to render a chapter's main character to never appear once within its main story is something I will always remember about Evernight Beat. Roland, a veteran performer intimately familiar with the stage and the spotlight, acts as a supporting actor instead of becoming the star of the show. One of PGR's most charismatic figures finally gets his day in the sun, giving us a chance to learn about his past and what drives him to make the choices he does, and it can only be experienced as a secondary tale to the main plot. Roland is the exact type of character I think many of us appreciate in these long, ever-expanding stories found in live service games. He's a character who's easy to despise, being almost comically antagonistic in his early appearances. But immediately there's an air of mystery and curiosity about who and what he really is. His charisma is palpable in every scene he's a part of, and you can't help but enjoy the moments where he's a key player of the cast, even if those moments involve him being a constant thorn in humanity's side. A great show is, for me personally, far and away the most interesting way an interlude story has been told in PGR up to this point. We're tossed into the fabricated world Roland grew up in from the very first line of text, and the twists that are unearthed throughout the interlude are almost certain to blindside first-time readers. I don't think it's an accident that Roland is Evernight Beat's main character, who can only be portrayed as a supporting actor, when the interlude deceives us into misreading the exact opposite of that situation. Young Roland is the supporting actor to Mandy's main character status, thinking he is simply performing in a method acting role taken to the extreme. We find out within a side story that he is still the main character, and he's the only one left unaware of that facet. These recent chapters have done a masterful job of humanizing some of the key members of the Ascension network. Many of the Ascendants have put themselves in decidedly gray areas on where their alliances lie, but the backstories of Lamia and Roland serve to remind us that those we perceive as absolute evils are rarely so simple. Roland's growth in the Hidden Chapter is an important and notable story that at its heart centers around three mostly insignificant characters in the grand scheme of PGR's overarching story. But supporting roles can be just as vital to an exquisite performance as the leads themselves. The actions of Zack and his cohorts after they fall for Roland's deception may turn out to be the only reason Babylonia did not suffer even more losses than the decimation they received at the hands of an ever-evolving punishing virus. So Roland's choices to ease some of his guilt for constantly performing a script based entirely in lies is a major turning point for his character, but it's one that leaves us with even more questions about what side he'll choose to stand upon in the battles to come. However, for our heroes who barely escaped Puglia Forest Park with their lives, the battle has shifted to one solely focused on survival. We've watched Grey Raven endure dark moments and heavy setbacks, especially during Commandant's confinement at the hands of Kurano, but it all pales in comparison to the state we find them in after their complete dismantling at the hands of the unidentified twins. Yet again, the stage has been set, but in place of bright spotlights and vibrant scenery, we are about to witness a new performance, mired in darkness and with a completely near absence of hope. Humanity will have to overcome monumental odds, new depths of hardship, and suffocating despair simply to get back in the fight, let alone have any designs of somehow winning it. Humanity is on the verge of evolution passing it by, and in its darkest hour, can it find a new beacon of hope to light the way back home? Thank you very, very much for watching this extremely long and admittedly convoluted lore dive. I'm gonna be honest with you all, this one was infinitely more difficult to make than the last Spark video. Going from a tightly focused story that highlighted only a handful of key characters made for both a pretty smooth scripting process and really easy themes to pick out for discussion. Evernight Beat is so much wider in scope, and with even more dramatic moments and far-reaching consequences for the events that happen. Trying to figure out how to present the important evolutions in the war for the surface, while highlighting how incredibly impactful and interesting the hidden story and interlude are, was a real challenge for me. There's still a lot I can learn on how to refine and adapt this lore series, but we've reached an incredibly important moment in PGR's story. Not only is the next chapter arguably one of PGR's most important in its entire history, it's the first of the chapters to do away with the hidden side of the story. This next video is originally going to be what made me want to do this lore series in the first place, and I've got zero doubt that I'm going to be stressing mightily on making sure that it's the most well put together piece I've ever personally made of any video. For now though, let me thank you profusely for watching my work. These videos are purely labors of love, and as a solo creator, they take many hours for me to put together at the level of quality I expect of myself for this lore series. If you want to support my future work on this series or any of the PGR guides and various videos I create, I do have a Patreon available. None of my work's ever gated behind any paywalls, but if you're interested in having ad-free versions of my videos and some other minor perks, feel free to check out the page. It's always down in my video descriptions. As always, I can't overstate how appreciative I am for your feedback and support. I'm definitely going to need a little break after this one, but rest assured, my intention is to have the gap between this and the next lore video be much shorter than the gap between chapters 15 and 16 were. We'll see if I can make good on that plan, but for now, thank you so much for watching. As always, I welcome your input on this lore dive in the comments, and as always, please take care of yourselves and be good to one another. Till next time, friends.